You're watching the Ship on Day 1 Field Guide. I'm Hans. Let's get ship done. You're probably watching this video because you're interested in scaling out knowledge sharing on your team or across your organization. Maybe you already have some documentation in place, or maybe you have some suggestions and ideas for how to make documentation and knowledge sharing better for your team. As software developers, you and I know that it's important to drive towards consensus, especially on things like documentation, to make sure that everyone's on the same page and has a shared series of expectations around what the documentation is, what it should cover, and where it should live. During this video, we'll look at 3 concrete steps in order to effectively scale knowledge sharing across your team. Step 1. Share the documentation with your team, the ideas and suggestions that you have. Set up a meeting and show them the documentation that you've written and the structure that you're proposing. You certainly don't have to come up with all of the documentation before this meeting, but it's important that you get started with concrete steps, including the structure and maybe 1 or 2 pages of documentation. That allows you to show exactly how you'll want to move forward as a team. During this meeting, you should drive consensus. And as one of your goals, try and have this meeting sometime relatively soon, maybe by the end of the sprint. Number 2, if you have a way of programmatically documenting your code, for example, Java docs or JS docs, make sure that that documentation is generated and then actually hosted somewhere. Too often, the code comments are written in a beautiful way in Java docs format so that this documentation could be hosted, but for some reason, it never is. Make sure that if you have the comments written within a JS doc or a Java doc format, that you're actually able to generate and host the documentation. 3, as a team, review and edit the documentation on a frequent or at least regular basis. Make sure that as a part of the culture on your team, it's understood that when you find something that's wrong in the documentation, it's your responsibility to fix it. That means that instead of just complaining about a step being broken, you can figure out why the step is broken, how the step should actually be worded, and then update the documentation. In order to achieve this point, it's important to make sure that there is a very low amount of friction added to the editing process for documentation. This is why wikis can be nice. You can edit them right within your browser. Once you've done these 3 steps, you will find that you will have effectively been able to scale knowledge sharing across your team for at least one project. And you can replicate that type of documentation and the frameworks and tools used here on other projects or on other teams across your organization. Join me in future videos when we talk about how to measure and optimize knowledge sharing to make sure that it's working for you and your team. You can find those videos and so many more resources at shiponday1.com. I'll see you there. Thank you.